Hi everybody and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about parallelograms, so the start of our new unit here. So a quadrilateral, oops, that was a miss, or a shape with four sides, is just an easier way to say that, is a parallelogram if opposite sides are parallel. So the only thing that we're looking for here is if I think I can highlight these. If you look at the side that's directly across, it has to be parallel. So basically it extends forever, forever, forever without intersecting. That's that Taylor Swift and John Mayer example. They will never, ever, ever get back together. The two sides with matching colors will never, ever, ever cross. So if you have a shape that has opposite sides that are parallel, it's a parallelogram. A square, for example, would be an example of a parallelogram. Same thing with a rectangle. So it doesn't just have to look like this. As long as that one condition is met, opposite sides are parallel, it is, in fact, a parallelogram. Often you'll see this marked with those little arrows, like you can see here, and I can point them out for you there. So I just trace them in blue. You can see those on the screen, and I'll trace the other ones in yellow. If you have matching arrows, that's just going to indicate that they are parallel lines. The way that we write this out is just you draw the shape like this, parallelogram, and then you just use the 4 points. So Q, P, R, S. The order really doesn't matter, as long as you kind of have that shape and you're like, okay, it's, parallelogram QPRS. The big thing is if you ever see something written like that, you'll know that it just means it is parallelogram QPRS. So this symbol looks kind of like the parallelogram you see above. That's going to indicate that it is, in fact, a parallelogram. Next, there are a few properties of parallelograms, and the whole reason why it's important to know is it or is it not a parallelogram is because of these things. So I'll use a darker color here, actually. Parallelograms have four sides. That's what quadrilateral means. The quad in quadrilateral, that means four. So four sides, the most basic thing. Secondly, opposite sides are parallel. So we already defined that part, but the second piece actually is that they have to be congruent. So not only will they never ever get back together or cross, but additionally, they are exactly the same length. So again, if we highlight opposite sides here, and I would recommend that you do this, I think it's just good practice. If we highlight these opposite sides, we know that, for example, if this side is 5, then the other side here, it also has to be 5 because they're equal to each other. So the same thing goes with the blue. Additionally, opposite angles are also congruent. So if we're looking at, highlight this in green, this angle right here that goes from here to here, that angle is the same as the angle in red that goes from there to there. Those things are the same. So again, if it's directly across, opposite, it's going to be congruent. Consecutive, this might be a new word. That just means next to. Consecutive angles are supplementary, or they add up to 180 degrees. So for example, if we're looking at A and B are next to each other, I'll do this one in blue, that means that this plus this equals 180. So angle A plus angle B equal 180. The last piece here, their diagonals bisect each other. That just means that they cut each other into equal pieces. So for example, if, let's say, I should use a new color here, green maybe. This segment in green is equal to this segment in green. So if we kind of like split them up at point O, that's the point where they are kind of like different here, kind of split them in half from this side to the left and then the other side to the right, those would be equal. The same thing would go for here, from here to here, oh, wrong color, from here to here, and from here to here, those are also equal to each other. So a whole lot of solving is possible based off of these 5 things, and you're going to see a lot of examples where you have to set them equal to each other, you have to do part plus part equals whole, where their whole is going to be 180 if they're consecutive angles. So just a few things to practice. And let's actually go over a few of those examples. So if we're working on a parallelogram that looks like what we were just looking at. Again, first things first, verify that it is in fact parallel. So you'll have little symbols like this. And let's say they tell us that this angle here equals 35 degrees. And they would like us to solve for x. Well, first we have to determine what are these. So they're not opposite, they're next to each other. So because they are next to each other, that means that they are consecutive angles. I can't spell consecutive, my goodness. So we have our consecutive angles here. And what we can do with these now is do our part plus part equals whole. So part, and whole. So if we go back to our definition, we know that consecutive angles add up to 180 degrees. So that is the whole. And then we just put each of those angles in there. So our 35-degree angle in blue, and then x is the other angle in red. So now we can use this and go through and solve. So subtract 35 from both sides, subtract 35 from both sides, and we end up with x equals 145 degrees. So that's an example of parallelograms with consecutive angles for solving. Another example, again, make sure that they are in fact parallel. So got to make sure we have our Taylor Swift-John Mayer example, otherwise it is not in fact a parallelogram. You might have like 4x plus 7, and then maybe like equals 39. And for this case, we have opposite sides. And if we have opposite sides, we know that they are congruent or equal. So instead of doing part plus part equals whole, we actually just set them equal to each other. So our side on top, 4x plus 7, is equal to our side on the bottom, 39. They have to be equal to each other. Otherwise, by definition, it's not a parallelogram. Okay, so subtract 7 from both sides. We'll end up with 4x equals 32. Divide both sides by 4, and you'll get an answer of x equals 8. So these are the types of questions that we're going to be practicing solving today. You have to use the properties from above. Basically, are you setting them equal to each other? Do they add to 180? Do they bisect each other? So use the properties that we have from here, so these 5 properties, to basically set up an equation to solve. So if you have these 5 properties down, definitely have them in your notes. But if you have them down, you're going to set yourself up for success because these are the 5 major components